Please center yourself in whatever way feels comfortable for you as we enter into a time of prayer and meditation. Infinite Spirit, ground of all being, to that which each of us deems holy and worthy of worship, thank you for this day. Thank you for another opportunity to better understand the world around us and the people who live in it with us. Thank you for helping us to open our minds to new and unexpected possibilities and realities beyond our own limited experiences. Thank you for this community of friends and family where we can share, learn, and grow together. Thank you for compassion and wisdom as we attempt to help those who are in need of our assistance. And thank you for guidance and direction as we strive to live our lives to the best of our abilities with love for ourselves and for all those around us. Amen and namaste. Patty tricked me today. The first part of my sermon, which I'm going to start in just a minute, is not about Patty. I wrote this almost 10 years ago, and I've given it a couple of times. But this is also called irony. So here goes. We've all seen it, read about it, or we've seen its results. It's happened to children, women, the elderly, and it's happened to men. There were signs. There were bruises, countless bruises, over and over again. There were black eyes caused by run-ins with doors. There were even broken bones. All the evidence was there, or so those who recalled later, after the horrifying evidence could no longer be ignored. But then there was also the other evidence. Or was it really evidence after all? He or she was a good father, mother, son, daughter, or neighbor. They were members of the PTA or the symphony, or they taught school or even Sunday school. They were good church-going Christians or synagogue-attending Jews. So it just couldn't be true. They couldn't be abusers. But it was true. The child, the woman, the grandmother or grandfather was terribly abused and either seriously injured or dead. But the fact remains, it was abuse. So how did we get here? How did everyone see the evidence and yet completely ignore the evidence? One of the things that's often going on is something called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is that uncomfortable feeling you get when you hold two conflicting beliefs at the same time. Someone you know is being abused, but that can't be true because the abuser is a really good and loving father. Psychologist Leon Festinger first identified the condition in 1957. In his book, A Theory of Cognitive Dissonance, Festinger proposed that two ideas can be consonant or dissonant. Consonant ideas logically flow from one another, while dissonant ideas oppose one another. For example, a person who wishes to protect other people and who believes that the COVID-19 pandemic was real might wear a mask in public. This is consonance. If that same person believed the COVID pandemic was real but refused to wear a mask, their values and behaviors would contradict each other. This is dissonance. A temporary solution to explain away one of your conflicting beliefs so that you can hold on to the other belief, that's where the other evidence, the not really evidence comes in. You accept this other evidence because some aspect of your life promotes this other evidence, and you can't go against your friends, your family, and your very tribe. They have eyes but choose not to see, and they have ears but choose not to hear. Those are the words of Jesus in Matthew, but they're also in Mark chapter 8, where he says, do you have a hardened heart? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? Sadly, the answer to those questions for some people is no, they don't. They choose not to see or hear. But for others, those whose reasoning abilities are still flexible, maybe a little more dissonance will cause them to be more open to real and tangible evidence. We can't force people to see, but we can sometimes remind them of actual evidence to the contrary. And if that causes more dissonance, then so be it. Sometimes the dissonance forces a resolution, and sadly, oftentimes, it does not. An easy to understand example of cognitive dissonance relates to football. We all know football is a rough sport, but if you are an NFL player, you are likely passionate about the game and equally passionate about your health and fitness. After all, most professional football players are elite athletes, used to relying on their bodies for feats of strength, speed, and agility. Nevertheless, recently, the NFL settled a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit with retired players over concussions. Up until this settlement, the NFL argued that playing football was mostly safe, even though many people's gut intuition questioned the overall safety. In any event, most football players continue to decide with denial rather than with common sense. Just recently, however, and possibly due to the NFL settlement and all of the retired players coming forward with brain damage, things have begun to change, especially for players like Chris Borland. He called it quits after only one very successful season in the NFL. When he quit, he said, I just honestly want to do what's best for my health. His passion for his health won out over his passion for the game. There are countless other examples of cognitive dissonance, but I'm mostly interested in how it plays out in our religious lives and the primarily Christian society we all find ourselves living in. Cognitive dissonance has been going on as long as humans have been thinking, and it's affected Christianity just like every other institution. Early on, in Christianity, a dissonance developed when scientists began to realize the earth wasn't the center of the universe. Eventually, the evidence conclusively proved it wasn't. But people didn't want to go against the teachings of the church, so they continued to support the church. In the 1600s, Galileo was condemned for his heretical beliefs, and after his conviction, he spent the remainder of his life under house arrest. Eventually, however, the evidence prevailed, but it wasn't until 1999 when Pope John Paul II finally admitted the error of their ways. Yes, it took almost 400 years. Regarding the issues I want to explore today, when we attempt to tackle the cognitive dissonance we see in ourselves and others, the outcome will never be clear. If we are forceful with our knowledge, we may alienate both friends and family. If we aren't forceful enough, we can be complicit in some terrible lie and compromise our own integrity. Even so, I believe in almost every case, the words and actions of Jesus are on the side of compassion and actual understanding. So in dealing with our Christian friends, I suggest we use Jesus' own powerful words and teachings. Many years ago, a friend of mine died from complications due to AIDS. He grew up with what I call traditional, institutional Christian beliefs, which condemn homosexuality. Institutional Christianity pulls religious texts from the Old Testament and from Paul in the New Testament, and uses those scriptures to justify its condemnation of homosexuals. My friend had to deal with this antiquated belief system, and at the same time, his own life, including the facts that he was gay, and he had a loving relationship with another man for well over a decade. Sadly, my friend never reconciled his institutional Christian beliefs, which were in opposition with his love for another man, and also in opposition to the actual teachings of Jesus, who taught everyone to love one another, and who never, ever uttered a word, negative or otherwise, about homosexuality. I believe my friend died having lived with the profound dissonance resulting from these two conflicting belief systems. Over the years, the stigma has begun to fade as more and more evidence points to the fact that homosexuality is just a variant of the human condition. These new facts remain in tension with many religious beliefs that still condemn homosexuality. This has set up a cognitive dissonance for many people and many religious denominations. The United Methodist Church recently split into two distinct parts, primarily over the issue of homosexuality. My friend never resolved his dissonance, but many people do, and not always in a positive manner. Many LGBTQ plus youth are thrown out of their homes when they come out to their families. In those cases, the parents cling to their old beliefs and reject their children. Thank goodness not all parents act like that. Many accept their children just as they are and simply reject the negative religious beliefs. Their love for their children is stronger than their old beliefs. And still others choose not to resolve the dissonance. And one way to come to terms with the dissonance is through rationalization. A common form of rationalization regarding gays and religion is the often quoted statement, "I hate the sin, but love the sinner." With our efforts to support our LGBTQ plus friends, we can reinforce the unassailable evidence that Jesus never said anything negative about any of them. Jesus always preached acceptance and love for the marginalized in society. All too often, followers of Jesus have eyes, but they are still blind, and they have ears, and yet they are still deaf. We can't force them to change their minds, but we can remind them of their own stated beliefs. And if that causes more dissonance, then so be it. Sometimes the dissonance forces a resolution. The dissonance is no greater in Christianity than it is when violence is chosen as a solution to conflict. Unfortunately, this is nothing new. It's always been that way within institutional Christianity. This is in spite of the fact that one of Jesus' most famous and memorable sermons came from Matthew chapter 5, where he said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." And that comes from his Sermon on the Mount. Could it be any clearer? Peacemakers are the children of God. Even so, I often come across Christians who claim to be warriors Someone who is willing to kill another person in the name of Christ is the preferred model, as opposed to the good shepherd, someone who takes care of each and every member of the flock. Now I ask you, where in all of Jesus' teachings did he condone the use of violence? There are no such teachings. In my opinion, using violence in the name of Jesus has become the norm, and there is a profound cognitive dissonance between accepting violence in institutional Christianity and as opposed to all the actual teachings of Jesus. In this case, institutional Christianity often wins out over the actual teachings of Jesus. But if we counter that belief system with the most sacred of all Christian traditions, the Easter story, here too we find Jesus never accepted violence in his name or on his behalf. In the Easter story, when Jesus was betrayed and arrested, his followers saw what was happening, and one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. Jesus yelled, "No more of this!" And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Jesus was absolutely clear. Violence on his behalf was unacceptable. If you are a follower of Jesus and at the same time a proponent of the use of violence or even war, the cognitive dissonance must be there. And if there is no dissonance, what does that say about your beliefs in the actual teachings of Jesus? Here too, rationalization also works well. When someone dares to question the need for violence, one of the first things we often hear is, the ends justify the means, which is something Jesus absolutely never said. Once again, they may have eyes, but they are still blind, and they may have ears, but they are still deaf. We can't force them to change their minds, but we can remind them of their own stated beliefs. And if that causes more dissonance, then so be it. Sometimes the dissonance forces a resolution. Now imagine, if you will, another situation. One that often involves children. It seems almost every day a tragedy with children plays out in our news. A few years ago, tens of thousands of Central American children fled their home countries, primarily El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. They ended up seeking refuge on our borders. In fact, there were children of all ages, and I simply can't imagine the violence and oppression they must have endured in their home countries, which forced them to flee and travel thousands of miles seeking refuge here. The unfolding of this tragedy was staggering, and yet many people who claim to follow Jesus, who said, "What you do to the least of these, you do to me." Those same Christians had no problem whatsoever demanding that those children be turned away from our borders and sent back home to the horrors they fled from in their home countries. Recently, razor wire was placed in the Rio Grande River, and children were injured trying to get around it to safety. But for the people who caused injury to children through those actions, their callous beliefs trumped the passionate teachings from Jesus to help the least of these, which absolutely includes all children seeking shelter here in our Christian nation. If you can turn away or injure children fleeing brutality and oppression, and yet still claim to be Christian, there's no doubt the real person and teachings of Jesus have little to do with your particular version of Christianity. Once again, they may have eyes, but they are still blind, and they may have ears, but they are still deaf. We can't force them to change their minds, but we can remind them of the actual words of Jesus. And if that causes more dissonance, then so be it. Sometimes the dissonance forces a resolution. Yes, cognitive dissonance is a reality for all of us. We are all torn from time to time between competing beliefs. Some are strictly secular beliefs, like where we love something in particular, but aspects of that thing are dangerous. Football being a really good example. And sometimes our competing beliefs stem from long-held traditions, cultural norms, prejudices and biases, fears of the unknown, or even a fear of change. Whatever the reason, there may be tremendous resistance to define those entrenched systems and their associated beliefs. The opposing evidence for the conflicting beliefs needs to be strong, and the motivations for accepting the evidence needs to be even stronger. But I believe we must face the fact going against family or community is difficult, and for some people, it's just impossible. I must strongly reiterate the next point I'll make. When the dissonance is strong, and a person feels they must choose between a friend with radically different ideas or their entire life with family and friends built on old beliefs, these individuals will often choose the old beliefs rather than upending their world and accepting new ideas. Their only choice may be to end friendships and sever ties to make the dissonance go away. In the last few years, I've felt this problem keenly with both family and friends, especially related to politics. No amount of actual evidence opposing their faulty thinking causes them to change their minds. I'm guessing many of us have lost dear friends, I know I have, for openly challenging their support for people or beliefs that are obviously dangerous or hurtful. The reality is, sometimes when we share and stand up for what we know to be true, and which is supported by facts, the cognitive dissonance going on inside others will simply be too great. And it will cause them to end the relationship because our relationship with them is just too painful to continue. And we can never know when we share or stand up for what we know to be true, when the ending of a relationship will be the result. As is always the case, the choice to share or not to share is up to you. And whether or not you feel the need to stand up for what you know to be true. Just remember, there are far more people on the fringe, people who are struggling with competing beliefs, and for them, additional evidence, whether it is scientific or biblical, may help sway them to the side of reason and compassion. Some of the seeds of doubt you plant with actual evidence will not grow. But some seeds will grow and produce beautiful flowers and bear delicious fruit. You will not convince everyone, but for some, the evidence will absolutely open their eyes so that they can see, and it will open their ears so that they can hear. In conclusion, the following is attributed to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. So you, and you alone, must decide whether to be silent or not about the things that matter to you." Amen.